Welcome to Tell the Damn Story, the show that explores the many ways to navigate the successes and failures that aspiring and struggling writers face to make your journey that much easier.
Hey, is that you? How you doing? Thanks for coming to Tell the Damn Story. We have some stuff for you today.
Yeah, we do.
How are ya? I'm Chris Ryan. That's Alex Simmons. And we are here to tell the damn story.
One more time.
This YouTube show podcast, what it seeks to do is go over our challenges to try and make your challenges go more smoothly when you're doing writing and going to seek out publishers and all that stuff. Even if you're just trying to keep a book on a shelf. And I love William Goldman. Well, we got to put Teal up there. So today, this episode is going to seek to answer couple of questions. One, what makes current events fertile ground for fiction writing?
Mm-hmm.
But two, what mistakes do we make when writing about current events that might limit the appeal of such a work of fiction? And if you continue to listen to this guy, and a little bit to me, we're going to go over 5 things to do to combat or just check yourself to make sure that your fiction is not that limited, is not limited or chained down by something that gives it a short shelf life as opposed to being something you can read years and years from now.
Years.
So we'll use some of this being Alex, we'll use some stuff from the Wayback Machine, the Alex Simmons Time Machine. But first, we're going to say, hey, Alex Simmons, creator of Blackjack, writer of Batman and Scooby-Doo and so many other things, Archie and Sherlock Holmes and the Raven League. And I think he wrote a story about your mom, if I don't remember. Yeah. Writer of all things, Alex Simmons, tell us a story. Maybe a story set in that school you teach at.
Yeah. Once upon a time.
Story time.
Once upon a time. Hey, Chris. Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Good to be here. Yeah, as Chris pointed out or laid out for you in the intro, I do teach screenwriting at the New York Film Academy, and I've done this for several years here, and I have consistently just wonderful gatherings of young minds and not so young, because the school appeals to people from 18 to 70 years of age. You name it, they're in there. But when I teach, I try to utilize both current material, current media and films and television shows, but I also like to, as Chris refers to it, go back into the past. And in particular, sometimes I use episodes from old shows that are like 30 minutes. You know, the episodes were supposedly 30 minutes long. They're actually only 22 minutes. I use them because, again, a lot of our students are doing short films to start out. So I want to have them get the sense of how you can tell quality stories, good stories, in a short period of time. But recently, I used 2 episodes from the original Twilight Zone TV series. Rod Serling. All hail Rod, right? And I picked these 2 for very specific reasons. One, I wanted to use to help them understand better how you can tell a character-driven story without action-packed this and things blowing up and people being shot and blood splattering. Just a simple little story about a human being in a fantastic situation. And then the other I picked because of the social commentary that it was making at the time it was shot, which is 1959. The effect of both that afternoon when I showed them and my students and I discussed them is what we're talking about this afternoon. Is the power of story when it resonates over a great period of time in this particular case. So the one in particular, the first story was actually called One for the Angels. And It's a wonderful story about this street peddler with his little case that he opens up and has a little attached stand, little leggings, and stands out on a street corner, and he opens up this suitcase and he has stuff in there. He has ties, he has handkerchiefs, he has some toys, and they're all like penny, 50-cent type items. But this is how he makes his living. He's 70 some odd years old. He's been doing this for 20 or more years, and this is what he has. And as we get to know a little bit about him in the beginning of the story, we see that this is his world, but do we feel sorry for him? Not as much, because he's got a little apartment, a little place where he lives. He is loved by the children of the neighborhood. He is kind to them, and it's just this wonderful, sweet old man who, when he gets home, realizes that this other man is waiting to talk to him, and this man is death. And he's come to tell him that tonight at midnight you die. You're going to go. You're going to go in your sleep. Don't worry. It's not going to be bloody or messy or anything like that. I just want to go over some facts just to make sure that you're prepared for this. And of course, our character does not want to die. And what he does through a series of conversation with death is there's a loophole. The loophole is, if you have something that you always wanted to accomplish before your death, maybe we can delay this. And he goes, really? So he says, I've always wanted to give the perfect pitch, one for the angels, the great pitch that opens up the heavens and all this. And Death says, okay, you know what? I'll give you a little time for that. Just a little time. By the way, how much time are you going to need? And the old man just basically closes the door in Death's face and says, I'm never going to pitch again. Oh, geez, I'll be living forever because I'm not going to give him a shot. And so Death says, oh, really? You're not going to go. You're going to do this. You sure now? You sure you want to do this? Because there are consequences for it. No, no. Hey, you made the deal. You're stuck with it. He says, if I can't take you, I'm going to have to take somebody else. And they hear brakes screeching outside. And when they run outside, one of the children has been hit by a car. And at midnight that night, he will come and take her soul. And this is where this character now has to face what he's done. And he begs Death. He says, look, I'm sorry. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. You can't take her. Take me. Death goes, nope, and walks off. Now, that's not the end of the episode. All right. But that's where we're left at that moment. And I was looking at the effect of this simple black and white episode written in 1959, performed by, no superstars. There's no big names in there. And the effect it was having on the students. And they're all right. So stories about characters are valid, simple characters, people who are theoretically the average person, the everyman or woman, who find themselves in this outrageous situation or this fantastic situation, doing something that maybe many of us would like to do when we are faced with that decision that could send us down a path we don't want to go. How can I get out of it? How can I get out? You can relate to that. And so my students I don't know what was going on in their head, but you could see them all, oh my God, oh, this is so much. And of course, the episode goes on. So that episode, which we're not here to focus on right now, but that episode had impact. The second episode was called The Monsters Are Due on Mulberry Street. And it's
Maple Street, right?
Maple. No. Yeah. Is it Maple? You might be right. I'll double check that, but I thought it was Mulberry. I could be wrong. But the idea is it's a suburban neighborhood. It's almost like a little cul-de-sac area. It's not quite, but it's the nice little houses, and everybody's got their family. They got their front lawns and everything like that. And something like late afternoon goes streaking overhead. Strange noises. They're all looking up, right? They never see anything like it. What is it, a meteor or whatever? And then the next moment, there's no power in the homes. None of the electricity is working. The phones aren't working. The radios aren't working. And when one of the neighbors gets in his car to go driving downtown to talk to the police and try and figure out what's going on, the car won't start.
It was Maple Street, just so you know.
Oh, it is Maple. Okay. So everything energy-based has come to a dead halt. And everybody's out on the street now talking. The neighbors are all out there buzzing. What happened? Why does this happen? This is strange. This is strange. And a teenage boy, one of the children, says, don't try and leave the neighborhood now. They don't want you to go. And he proceeds to spin this thing about, I've read it in the books, I've read it in comics, it's aliens and they've got control of it and they don't want you to leave. And at first the adults are going poo poo, yeah. And then suddenly they start to consider the possibility that something is weird. And then the kid takes it another level and says, they always send down some aliens who look like humans. They look like us. They live among us, but they're really not one of us. And they're the ones who are the vanguards for the invasion. And slowly the neighbors begin to look at each other. And then there's a neighbor across the street who didn't come out when the noise passed overhead, who hadn't been in the gathering. He's trying to start his car, it won't start. He's standing on the street now going, gee, I don't know why my car won't start. And suddenly his car starts up. Nobody's in it. He's not, he's standing away from it. It starts up. And then they start getting suspicious. How come your car when nobody else is? Nobody else has energy. No. And it begins to build from there and snowball from there until they're starting to look at each other as the potential enemy. And each neighbor begins to accuse someone else because of something that they did. We know that you go down in your basement and you're working on something in your basement, and your wife said it's a radio, but we've never seen the radio. What kind of radio is it? Who are you talking to? And the suspicion and the paranoia begins to build and begins to build and begins to build. And then eventually it explodes. I won't go into what happens. But again, my students locked in. And then the
Now,
last 60 seconds of it is a narration, a closing narration by Rod Serling that hits the nail on the head. And my students are sitting there going, it's just like now.
mhm.
So
And
that's,
that ties us into
yeah,
the question I was going to ask, which was how do these two episodes of Twilight Zone comment on current events? And then we can work backwards.
I think of the two, again, as I said, with the one for the angels, it's more of a human character driven story about the average person and what have we made of our lives and what's important. And people can relate to that. And again, as I saw my students, because again, the lead character in that is 70 something, and my students are probably the oldest in the room at that point, is maybe 20. So it's not a matter of they're looking at their age and going, oh my God, this is me now. But they're looking at, yeah, what have I done? Or I haven't accomplished the things I wanted to accomplish. And how does that make me feel? And I understand what he feels. So in that case, it's more human to human sort of scenario, feeling like, yeah, I get it. But with Mulberry Street, the monster on Mulberry Street, that's very much about what happens when we start looking at that person next to us as the other, as you're the
Mm.
cause of the problem. Is you're the one who's different from us. You claim to be one of us, but you're not because of whatever. And now you're a threat. Or because I now fear you, or I fear my surroundings, I'm going to take up arms and I'm going to cause an accident and someone's going
Mm.
to be harmed
Yeah.
by this. And I don't know who to trust. And it just becomes this whole thing. And again, in one of the in the episode, there's a scene where we see who is actually manipulating this circumstance, and they're commenting like, "This is all we have to do is plant that seed and
Yeah.
turn them against each other, and
Well,
you just step back and watch it happen."
and you can see with both those episodes how they could have been vehicles for current event commentary. The first one, I mean, the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street can tie directly into 24-hour news, social media, propaganda, the absolute marketing of the political message. And then when that gets echoed, especially today, where each group has its own little echo chamber where they only listen to their own thoughts and thoughts that they agree with. And then each side is condemning the other side in no matter which way you look at politically, ethnically, racially, financially, all of it. They just keep getting more and more escalation in their paranoia, much like that episode.
And the
The one with
interesting
the
thing
ain't.
too, the interesting thing too is, again, we start out with a community of sameness because they're all in this episode, they're all white.
Right.
They're all in the same basic financial scenario. They all have
Hmm.
their front lawns manicured. They have their one car. Some of them have children, some don't. But basically, yeah, we are all the same. We've known each other at least 5 years or more, and we've lived this life. And now I don't trust you.
And then you see these little unimportant differences that they blow up and they start making claims that are unfounded. Now they said, so it must be true.
And then they
And the
act
one,
on those.
what was it? Speak for the angels, pitch for the angels,
Oh, yeah, one for the angels.
one for the angels.
Yes.
That to me rang very current because there are people who voted for particular candidates and now have regrets. I've seen it on both sides. And then people who didn't vote and they regret everybody. Yeah. So that whole idea of wanting something so much and being, let's say, energized about it, and then realizing it wasn't the message you thought, it wasn't the solution you thought it was never going to work as presented. And you can make that particular case on both sides. So if there's anyone over there
You
who's,
absolutely you can, and I think the other thing that we talked about was consequences. It's a lesson in the first one for the angels is also a lesson in consequences. You
yes,
know, you cannot make certain totally selfish, rash decisions
right,
and not face some consequences. And sometimes those consequences may not affect you directly; they'll affect somebody else that you care about.
yeah.
You know, and then what do you?
And we can make that argument that both sides have made choices that they are now facing consequences for.
Mhm.
However, the Twilight Zone episodes do something to avoid the kind of mistakes that would have limited them to the 1950s to the early 60s when they were first coming out. If they had been heavy-handed in using the politics of the time
Mhm.
and that the jargon used, whether it's I like Ike or whatever, it would have been those kind of things, the specificity of current events, change your story to that year, that month, that week. If we were writing a story about musicians, right? And if we write about Joe and the Tadpoles, well, that could happen anywhere, right?
Mm.
But if we say Elvis, it's a certain time.
Mhm.
If we say the Temptations,
It's a
certain
certain
time.
time. Yeah.
Spice Girls, certain time. With Sex Pistols, you can't really write a story in 2025 or 2075 with that any of those bands
Unless
because
you are doing a retro story, unless you are writing specifically about that time period. Yeah. Yeah.
but that supports my
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
argument here
No,
or my
absolutely.
point that it is chained to a time.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are writing about current events, you have to look at, well, who's populating the story? What actions are populating? And does that chain it to a time or does it work as a viable metaphor? Recently, we were talking about It's Been a Pleasure, which is
Privilege.
about the villain is the textbook white male privilege kind of character, but it's not named for someone famous of this time, or the issues aren't named by its
Mm-hmm.
behavior. Behavior is more timeless than historical fact.
Exactly.
So you have to your choice. Am I writing a historical drama or historical mystery or historical horror, or am I writing, a metaphoric piece like Jaws? If you watch that this summer, whenever the summer comes, it still works. The suits, the clothing might be a little outdated, but the situation still
Yeah.
works. But there are some that are tied a little more to Like when you see, say, one of the early Lethal Weapons, and they bring out this big phone that is like the size of your head.
Yes, standing on the
It
bridge.
knocks you right out of the
Yeah.
story. Not as much as a wall phone and answering a wall phone. That doesn't really bother people as much. It's becoming a bit of an anachronism.
Again, you were saying in terms of metaphors and all that. Again, we're talking about stories that really are about the human condition, and that is eternal or universal. The kids could, or my students could identify with a 70-year-old man from 1959. When we were looking at the episode itself, and this goes to, again, storytelling, where you're talking about whether you're talking about a book or a screenplay, one of the things I said is, what do you learn about this man? What do you, from what you hear, and then what do you learn about this man from what? And so certain things that are said during the episode point out things like his age, the fact that he has a sister in Buffalo, that he likes kids. That, as a matter of fact, he throws a little bit of an ice cream social every evening after everybody's had dinner. They meet on the stoop, and these are things that you're told about him. When you go into and his apartment is basically one room with a kitchenette, right? And it's very old, and there's a lot of bric-a-brac and tchotchkes on the walls and on the shelves, and there's stacks of things. And I know I see these things, and the students, not all of them saw certain things, but one student said, he's got newspapers. I said, does he just have newspapers? And he thought for a moment, no, he has stacks of them. I said, what does that tell you about him? And another student goes, he hoards. I said, yeah. I said, it's never said. It's never made a point
Right.
of. But when you look at his room, you see his fold up bed, the kind of furniture, these are telling you things about him. So when he finally does say, I've lived in this apartment for over 20 years, you get it. When you hear that he's never been married and he doesn't have children, then you realize he's been alone. This is his world. And the
Mm-hmm.
children outside are the closest he has to a family. So that's the human condition. You can understand loneliness and things like that, and you can write good stories about how we deal with being alone, feeling cut off from society, or maybe feeling like we've never accomplished anything, or wanting to accomplish things and feeling that we can't, we're not good enough. We can connect to those kind of stories, and you can tell those kind of stories in almost any era.
Right. Now,
Same thing with the paranoia.
the kids in elementary school today, right? By the time they get to be old enough to be your students, the experience of newspaper in the household will be so rare that pile will seem to stick out. However, this episode came out in the sometime in the 1960s, probably in the earlier 60s, right?
No, I think it's 1959. It's
Oh, it came out in
59.
59.
Yeah,
So think of the shelf life from 59 to
66
probably,
years.
yeah, yeah. And it will not run into serious problems for another 5 or 10 years before that sticks out as what the hell. Some kids might be like, it's black and white, it can't be good. But film students get educated out of that and get to see the story. But that's what we mean by shelf life. You want to write a story that has a chance to have an arc of existence where it's relevant. If you were to take either of those stories, let's say Maple Street, because we're both very familiar with that, and lace every one of the comments of the neighbors with words like woke and the Trump agenda and Biden and Kamala, it might seem it's cutting edge for 3 or 4 years max. But 10 years from now, it's going to seem like a little kernel of history. When COVID hit, we were both teaching writing, and of course, reading and listening to a lot of other writing teachers about what you should do with that. And the wisdom was, if you want to write about a pandemic or you want to write about the apocalypse, might be a more serviceable metaphor than COVID. because the thought was, especially when we got 3/4 the way through and medicines were becoming available and stuff, was that one, it wasn't going to last forever. And two, when it was over, very few people were going to run to read about it because the whole world experienced it. Out of body experiences, much more timeless. Dying and being reborn or being brought back to life, much more rare. So it becomes more timely, you know.
I would comment on only on a certain ironic joke that the universe played on me because COVID hit 2019, right? 20 this fall or the latter part of 2018, like around maybe November or so, I stumbled across, because I do the time machine thing, I stumbled across a Terry Thomas movie. Terry Thomas is a British actor, comedian from the 1950s. I stumbled across this movie called A Matter of WHO. And it's a light comedy kind of thing. But the premise was that a person gets on the plane flying from the Middle East to London. And when he gets off, they find out he's got the plague. And Terry Thomas is an agent for World Health Organization, WHO, and he has to find out how this guy got it, who else has been in contact with him, blah 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 blah. And it's a nice little story. It's a nice little story.
Mm.
But I'm looking at this in 2018, and they're talking about, oh, the potential, if we don't stop it now, it could spread and it could do this, it could do that. And in 2019, boom, we get this. So
It became very timely again.
yes, exactly. 1950 something for the Terry Thomas movie. Suddenly in 2019, we're living it.
But you would agree that was accidental as opposed to marketing, right?
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
because he talked about not the plague, but a plague, it had a longer shelf life. So
And
when we're
at this,
talking about writing about current events, we want think metaphor, we want to think general as opposed to specific,
I
you
would
know.
go even further to say that focus on the characters and not necessarily the specific disease. Because
But
when they do something about zombies or they do something about a vampire plague, that's different. Vampire, again, we're talking fictional we're talking fictional scenario, but we're focusing on the characters dealing with this fictional scenario.
but
Yeah, we're
you
talking
know,
about a plague, that's something else. There's been real plagues and we have to deal with that. So who are we focusing on? The characters and the circumstances, because that becomes more timeless.
but even when, I guess this was about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now, when there was this kind of craze of rewriting classics as zombie novels.
Yeah.
Jane Austen became a zombie novel,
Yeah, what was
and it
it?
was
Was Abraham
Abraham
Lincoln
Lincoln,
or Sojourner Truth was a zombie fighter or something like
right?
that?
And so was Abe Lincoln.
Yeah.
They
Vampires and
worked
zombies.
for the irony of putting that into a well-known piece or a well-known character, but it didn't Lincoln wasn't suddenly in the 2020s fighting. He was still, it was still back then.
Yeah.
So that's using a specific thing to tie it to the connection you want audiences to make.
Hmm.
Yeah, I want it to be this novel of manners, such as Jane Austen, and just have to deal with all these zombies, which had its own appeal for a small window of time. Different than putting in so many minute details of the
Hmm.
moment that it limits the window with which you can enjoy the story.
So again, we go back to, as you said a moment ago, a certain amount of generality in terms of the specific problem. But if we're focusing on the characters, that's a universal. If we're focusing on certain emotional scenarios, those are universals. Those are things that your
Mm.
audience can connect to. And as with these two Twilight Zone episodes, in both stories, the characters were going through things that we in present day, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at that, can identify with, we can relate to, we can connect to, we can understand that.
And it's the metaphor you use, or the trappings of the story in the 80s, two novels from the 80s, Bright Lights, Big City, and American Psycho. Bright Lights Big City is so mired in the 80s boom nightlife of just chasing mounds and mounds of cocaine until you fall apart that it's chained to that era forever. It's a great book, but it's so not the last two generations experience. They experience things in a completely different way. But American Psycho, someone with some privilege who just hates people for whatever reason. Even if you're having a discussion at one point, he's discussing the merits of Huey Lewis and the News, right? Even that can be forgiven as a time anachronism if you interpret this book as happening a little later than it actually does.
If you do an adaptation, then you can always plug in another band.
Yeah, you can. And I think there's a play version, maybe even a musical version that's coming now where there'll be a production decision whether we're going to keep this in the 80s or move it to another time. Whenever, I don't know whether it was the mid 80s or 90s with Huey Lewis. Even Huey doesn't know.
He hasn't been told yet.
But as one of the big deals, what other mistakes can keep us, or not mistakes, but writing elements, what other things can keep a story kind of pinned down to a time as opposed to having it's a situation of limited shelf life versus extended shelf
Well,
life.
once again, I'll use another old film as an example because there have been several adaptations or reboots of this. 12 Angry Men, all right? The original was a teleplay, and
Mm-hmm.
that was done in the early 1950s, early to mid 1950s. A teleplay is a play that's then filmed on television so it can be shown in that form.
As a play.
Right, as a play. Then there was the movie, the feature film with Henry Fonda and a cast of wonderful actors, and that was done in 1959. And that was all white men. So it's 12 Angry White Men, is really what that is. Then in 1997, there was a television movie adaptation done, 12 Angry Men. So again, it's all men, but it was a diverse cast of men. Edward James Olmos and Ossie Davis, and so it was black, white, and Latino in this room, and it changed the dynamics of the story to a certain degree because in 50, 57, 59, there was racism, 12 white men talking about racism or ignoring it or denying that they were bigoted, whereas now you had 12 diverse men dealing with the issue, and sometimes it was racism being thrust upon one of those men in that room having
Yeah.
that attitude. Now, there is a movie which I have not seen yet called 12, and
Right.
this is an adaptation of 12 Angry Men, but it takes place in Russia, and the protagonist is someone who is supposedly a rebel, and it's got a political sling to it. And again, I haven't seen it, but I've seen scenes from it, and I'm fascinated by it, and I want to see what they do with it.
Yeah.
But it's
Well,
obviously because of the location, and again, what the defendant is accused of is
right,
different than murdering his father, which is the
right.
plot in the American version of these.
And there's a high school age play that a friend of the show, Cassine Gaines, directed with his drama students, 12 Angry People, which has mixes in gender and diverse and where that goes. So
Then
it's
it
a
becomes
viable idea that
But
you
it becomes,
adapt.
what is the story about? And in this case, to me, the story is always, the core of the story has always been about what do these people bring to the table that will interfere with them being fair and ethical in making this decision?
Yeah.
How we are affected by the baggage that we carry, even when someone's life is on the line.
And this is a really good concept, the idea of a jury
Mm-hmm.
made up of peers.
Yes.
And the peers keep changing as the world evolves to more aware of the different voices. We could see this, you could really see this now, two completely different mindsets that cannot, right now, our country, there's the political divide, there's the ethnic divides, there's the religious, but mostly there's also the economic divide. And there are very little bridges remaining between those groups. So a version of 12 Angry, whatever you want to
Fill in the
name it,
blank.
could be different, extremely different again. And the ending could reflect that inability to make connections. That is a yet a different point being made, a different reason for it to exist. So it's one of the things that we have to bring into our creativity. What are we trying to say?
That's
Right?
it. That's
Right?
it right
Because
there.
12 being a great example, each one of those makes a slightly different statement. And the one yet to be done may make yet another
Hmm?
statement that we've gone beyond. We have forgotten how to cooperate, how to meet in the middle, how to exchange ideas, to listen to each other. There may be a version of this that is needed these days. But the idea, are you looking to do it to make that statement right now? I have a project that is under submission right now. I can't talk about it more than that. But if I do, it would be more along the lines of it's been a privilege in that it's a collection of poems and a conversation, not a poetry journal, but a conversation that is meant for the current, maybe 5, 10 years back, 10 years forward, and this inability to connect.
Okay. I think again, though, and just looking at the time here, I'm just thinking that again, what if I'm hearing you right, and I'm thinking about what I've also said too, this particular scenario of being able to tell stories that resonate across time is very much what we're talking about here. And it's looking at universal themes or looking at characters with universal challenges or conflicts. That's a part of what you're identifying when you want your story to have some longevity as opposed to being timely.
So
It's
you're
about
looking at
how,
that for longevity. You're also looking, am I using anything that will chain it down to a moment that would limit this? And can I make that more general, not using a historical name when you can use the job? Richard Nixon evokes a whole time zone, a whole era, a whole history. The president may not be as limited. Unless, of course, I'm writing specifically about Richard Nixon. Well, then
I'm not a
that's
crook.
that's
Right,
what that project
right.
is. But if your character is meant to be in the current project, there's no president mentioned, but there is a pronoun used. That's it. So they could be talking about their boss at work, or the president, or
Yeah.
God.
And
And
and I
that's the
think
kind of way you want to approach
right.
that. Is some element that I'm doing limiting, or is it enhancing it? Do I want that limitation, or is there something I can put in its place that will open it up to more interpretation, to a longer shelf life?
I also want to just
That's
put
two. We need to get three others.
here's another capper. Again with the monsters on Mulberry Street. The
Maple Street, although Mulberry might be just a
Why
different
am I
version,
doing that? Yeah, why am I? Okay, so
because
maple syrup, trees. Okay, anyway, the story itself, which I've already talked about and outlined, makes a very clear statement when you watch it, when you watch the deterioration of the relationships between these people. And then that episode is ending, and what we're getting is the resolution and then the closing remarks by Rod Serling at the end. And he makes a statement at the end, a closing statement that actually uses a word that isn't used in the story, but is inclusive. So, what we see in the story deals with people who look like each other, but the paranoia and suspicion that one among us is different. One among us is a threat. One among us, blah, blah, blah. And when he finishes his remark, one of the words that he uses is prejudice, which to me opens up the remark to also be racial. He's not saying race, but he's saying prejudice. And when again you
Yep.
think of 1959, 1960, and you know what was going on at that time, you're recognizing that, oh, yeah, because they all looked like each other. But yeah, prejudice could involve race, religion, so forth and so on. So he made that paranoia and the fact that people can be manipulated into turning on one another or looking for other people who are not like them as a threat, that could involve a bigger sphere. And I think, again, when we look at our stories, and as Chris has said, if you use certain terminologies that lock it into a specific time or an individual, that's one thing. But if you can frame your story so that you cover the theme and the message that you want and make sure that comes across, then there's certain word choices that you can use that will help really zero that in and
Right.
really lock that message in much more in a broader way or a much more specific way. So I
That
think
gives us three.
Sterling managed to do that very well with this particular episode.
Let me see if I can throw a fourth one in. There are times, and there's classic works out there that consciously choose to write about a specific time because the themes of that time, the arguments of that time are ringing true today. For example, the trial of the Chicago Seven. Aaron Sorkinson wrote it, right? Sorensen. And it's about the late 60s, Kent State, the 68 Democratic National Convention, very specific time, and about the prejudices of the time and the political arrogance and on both sides and clash on both sides. So they did an excellent job telling that story. And you can watch it in 2025 and say, yeah, I can recognize that today. That works. Something as far back as Oedipus. You can see the idea of the arrogance of leadership leading to that leader's downfall
Mm-hmm.
as a theme that works really well today,
But
and
again, you're
so
still
on.
talking about to a certain degree the human condition. You're talking about certain human flaws, greed, power mad, ego, things like that. Unfortunately, are part of the human condition, and we don't seem to be getting better at that. It seems that we repeat that, and it just
Right.
depends on how far we get to go each time we come around that circle. So I think again, your stories can, as Chris is saying, can be very specific like with the Chicago Seven, or it can be a broader theme or a broader message that you don't lock in a specific time zone or particular individuals, but the message is still quite clear. And for
Right.
you, aspiring, struggling, or emerging writers, it's what message do you want to tell? What do you want to say? What do you want to talk about? What do you want us to get? And how do you want us to get it? And what characters will help us get it? Those are the choices you get to make. And looking at older material that was successful is one way that you can be inspired, much like Chris in the other episode when you were listening to someone sharing their poetry, and that inspired
Oh, she was doing prose.
Pros. Okay, so then
Yeah.
even different, even more so in that one type of material inspired you to create a different type of material, but still you were inspired by it. So again, you
She,
can look at older films, older TV shows and things, look at those things, and if something clicks, again, it's something Chris said in a previous episode, don't judge the idea, write it down, go back to it a day or two or three or four later and what can I do with this? Do I want to do something with this? And if it's still talking to you, roll with it and see
right.
where it takes you.
I do have to just clarify. I'd have to go back and look at that episode to see whether she was using prose or poetry. Now I'm less sure. But I think we've given people a lot of the whole idea is you get an idea, and then as you're letting it grow, one of the things, what is the purpose? What am I trying to do?
Yeah. What are you trying to
know?
say?
And you might be using a time period as a metaphor, or you might want to write a metaphoric story that could apply to other periods and times and places. The monsters are doing Maple Street rings just as true to someone who grew up in a city environment
Yep.
or a rural environment, or
Because
now
community
as
is a
opposed to the
community.
50s.
Your neighbors are your neighbors, and your people are the people you know. What the setting is has some effect, but paranoia strikes deep no matter where.
Yeah. So
Okay.
write what's bugging you, and then rewrite it to the form that you think it's going to best serve the story. And that is how we do what?
Tell the damn story.
That's right. And if you liked our discussion of how you can do this particular story, do us a favor. Hit the subscribe. And if you really liked it, down below there's some kind of link where you can buy us a cup of coffee. Of course, I won't drink it. I'll drink tea. But
I'll
hey.
drink the coffee.
All right, Alex.
Pleasure, Chris. Everybody, thank you for listening, watching.
Thanks, everybody.
Drop into the comments. Let us know what you think of the episode. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about. Let us know what questions you have. Let us know. Okay?
Let us know, and then we'll
Let you know.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Yes.